Hey guys, so a few weeks ago on my community page, I asked for you guys to send me your Mahjong Soul game logs, and I received quite a few of them. I skimmed through all of them, and I covered most of them in one of my recent streams. One thing I noticed is that most of them are logs from the Go room, and I noticed a few issues that are pretty consistent across replays, which inspired me to make this video. So if you find yourself stuck in the Go room or at expert rank, this video is for you. However, this video can still be relevant to you if you are not an expert rank player, so be sure to stay to the end. I've made a list of 3 main reasons why you might find yourself stuck at the expert rank. Let's talk about the first reason. You fall way too easily. There seems to be a preconceived notion that once a player declares Richie, your hand is an instant fall. This is a very common problem for players who just promoted from adept to expert because their main takeaway from the silver room is that folding is important and that you should not deal in. However, this also results in many expert players having a fear of dealing in. They don't want to take risks because they are afraid to lose points by dealing in. And then usually because everybody else on the table has also folded, the most likely outcome is that the player zimos and takes points from everybody else. Therefore, most players I see in Go room go through the same 2 phases every round. Firstly, everyone tries to get into Tenpai, and secondly, once everyone declares Richie, everyone else starts to fold. So it's not uncommon to see Go room games become a contest of zimos, and you get 3rd or 4th place because everybody else zimos and you don't. Then you ask yourself, why am I so unlucky? I got to 3rd or 4th without doing anything, which is exactly the problem. So here's the thing, every Mahjong Soul game awards rank point bonuses or penalties depending on your position after the game. If every Go room game becomes a contest of zimos, you'll get each position 25% of the time. However, if you notice from the highlighted portions, the rank point bonuses and penalties cancel out to 0 once you hit expert 3, which means that if your playstyle remains like this, you are statistically likely to hit a wall once you reach expert 3. Which is why, if you see the distribution of players by ranking, we notice that from the pool of players adept 3 and above, almost 69% of them cannot climb beyond expert. Another important thing to note is that pushing and folding are not binary decisions. You don't have to hard commit to either pushing or folding. Now the way I see it, pushing and folding are more like 2 ends of a spectrum, and there are certain conditions throughout the match that make you lean more towards either pushing or folding. Depending on what you see on the table, you can judge the risk to reward ratio and then slowly adjust your decision on whether to push or fold. Above all, if you want to get better at Mahjong, you need to get over the fear of dealing in. Mahjong is a game where you need to take calculated risks in order to win a hand. Some players will be scared to deal in, so they don't want to take any risk. That is not playing to win, that is playing not to lose, and there is a huge difference between the two. Don't let your fear of dealing in influence your ability to analyze the situation and make the correct play. I'll use one of my recent games as an example. I'm in last place in South 3, 3500 points behind the 3rd place player who has just declared Richie. Now some Go room players may think, oh no, I'm scared to fall behind even further, I should just fall so that I don't deal in, and I hope the game ends in a draw and then I'll try to win the next hand. Now this is playing to not lose. Now as a player playing to win, here's what I see. Yes, there is a risk of dealing into the dealer if I push a dangerous tile. However, if he zimos, that is bad for me. If the game ends in a draw, that widens the score gap between us, and that's bad for me. There's no guarantee that the other 2 players will also deal into him. And my hand has value because I see Tan Yao with 2 Dora and a chance to upgrade to Sanshoku. Therefore, this is a hand that I can fight with, so I should push this hand and aim to overtake him. So, I cheat a 6p here, and I decide to push this hand. That one decision led me to this state where I zimoed the 7S to hit 2nd place. More importantly, take a look at all the dangerous tiles I had to push to even give myself this chance at victory. If I had been so scared of dealing in, I would never have pushed these dangerous tiles, and I would have likely lost a game in 4th place. Sometimes you will lose games by doing this, and it's okay. Just because you lost that game doesn't mean your decisions during the match were wrong. Therefore, the takeaway here is, don't be scared of dealing in, and don't be afraid to push when the time calls for it. Let's move on to the second reason why you're stuck at expert. You don't anticipate future danger. I previously made a video on Sakigiri where I discussed the idea of discarding more dangerous tiles earlier to avoid getting caught in any future danger. This is something I think Go room players need to start doing more. I see many Go room players having to fold a hand because they are stuck with a tile that they cannot discard, when that tile should not have even remained in their hand for so long in the first place. So some of you might be wondering, what are some of these signs of future danger? Now the most common one is when an opponent is doing a high scoring Yaku. For example, Honitsu or Chinitsu, which you can deduce from his discard pool. When the dealer has called Pong on his double Dong win, which gives him 2 Han and a Valley Yaku. Chanta or Junchan, where you see your opponent discard many middle tiles earlier while keeping 7, 8, 9 tiles, and the Dora is a terminal tile or 7, 8, 9 tile. So here's an example from one of my subscribers' game logs from the Go room. Judging by the Shimochar's melts and his discards, which are all from within his hand, what will you put him on? It could be Honitsu, it could be Chanta, it could be both. The fact that he discarded the Dora 7p, which is from his Honitsu suit, also indicates that his hand may already be in Tenpai. For now, you should already recognize the danger and stop throwing tiles that can fulfill all of these conditions. However, my subscriber discarded the 1p, and you can see the result for yourself. This dealing was completely avoidable if my subscriber had recognized the danger and instead discarded tiles that were less dangerous. Now, another sign of future danger is when opponents discard many middle tiles from their hand, which indicates that their hands are progressing rather quickly. When this happens, you should preempt an incoming Richie and start to keep safe tiles against them to buy yourself a few turns. You should also see some red flags when opponent A has declared Richie, but another opponent B is pushing many dangerous tiles. When this happens, you should be suspicious of B, because if B is pushing these dangerous tiles, he is representing a hand that is good enough to justify fighting into an opponent's Richie. Many Go room players make the mistake of having tunnel vision, where they only focus on A's discard pool instead of looking at the discard pools of both players. The last sign of future danger I'll talk about is when opponents have melded many times, while representing a valid Yaku like Tanyao. Usually when people are willing to open their hands so aggressively, they're representing that they have enough value to justify going for speed, and this is even more likely if they are behind in score. When this happens, you should ask yourself whether it's possible for him to have some Dora in his hand, whether it's red 5s or the Dora tiles. A good benchmark is, they are likely to be in Tenpai if they have melded 3 times on the first row of discards, 2 times on the second row, and 1 time on the last row. Now you don't need to look at discard reading yet, but as an expert rank player, you should at least be aware of the possibility that his hand might have multiple Dora. The bottom line here is to anticipate the danger and see it coming before it hits you. Finally, here's the last reason you're stuck at expert. You don't build value in your hands. This is actually the most common problem I notice when I see Go room game logs. In some situations, it's alright to go for efficiency or speed over value, but you should recognize when to chase for value and not to just blindly apply tile efficiency or the 5-block method. In fact, the further behind you are in score, the more you need to incorporate value into your hands. So what do I mean by value? I'm specifically referring to 2 things: Yaku and Dora acceptance. I'll go over a few common mistakes I see many players make when it comes to building value. For Yaku acceptance, some players don't know when to Dama 10 to improve the hand. I previously talked about this concept in a video called When to Richie or Dama, and one of the things mentioned was knowing when to Dama 10 if there are many possibilities to improve the hand. As a general guideline, if there are 2 times as many tiles you can draw in to improve your hand compared to the number of winning tiles, you should not Richie unless you absolutely don't need the value. Here, some people will be happy with declaring Richie on a Shampon weight for the 2S and the 9p. However, if you are building for value, you should discard the 9p pair here with the idea of aiming for Tanyao and Pinfu. Another common Yaku that players overlook is Xanxust. Here, if you are being purely efficient, we will discard 2S because the 2S is the least likely to form a Ramen raid around it. However, if you need value, a better discard here will be the 7M because it keeps the possibility of 2-3-4 Xanxust alive. Overlooking Xanxust possibilities is actually a very common mistake I see in Go room logs, like in this log, where the player discarded the 4M instead of the 9p, completely killing the option for Xanxust to get extra value from his hand. The 4M here also kills the possibility of accepting the red 5M Dora. Speaking of Dora acceptance, a very common mistake I see players make is not keeping tiles near the Dora, which kills the potential to incorporate the Dora tiles into their hand. Using this hand as an example, some players will discard the 8p here and take the fastest road to Tenpai. However, with hands like this, even if you do draw in that tile to reach Tenpai, your hand won't have a lot of value, and your hand might just be a Richie Nomi hand worth 1 hand. If it's still early in the game, or if you need the extra points, it will be better to sacrifice a bit of efficiency and discard either the 1-2p block or the 5S to give yourself the chance to draw in the Dora 9p. Here, the Dora is 9M, and this player discarded the 8M, which kills the potential 7-9M block if he draws in the Dora. Mistakes like these are small, but they add up over time. In another example, the Dora is 9p, but this player was too focused on tile efficiency, which says that 9p is a redundant tile in a 6-8-9p block. Therefore, he discards the 9p. In fact, because this is a hand where he is likely to pawn the chun, it is even more important for him to keep the Dora 9p in his hand, because he can chi the 7p from his Kamicha if he discards it. Finally, I'll talk about situations where you should aim for a Dora Tanki. Here the Dora is Sha, and the player discarded the Sha on this turn, while I would have discarded the 9p instead and tried to aim to Richi with a Sha Tanki weight. Here's the idea. If you declare Richi without the Sha in your hand, this hand is most likely a Richi Nomi hand, worth 1300 points. If you manage to Richi with a Sha Tanki weight, this hand is worth at least 5200 points, which is 4 times the value. With these kind of hands, where there will be no value otherwise, don't be afraid to declare Richi on a Dora Tanki. In summary, these are my 3 main reasons why you might be stuck at the expert rank, and if you work on these 3 things, it should help you climb out of the expert rank. Before I end this video, I just want to say that I started doing YouTube streams, where you can see me play my own rank matches and hear some of my thought processes in real time. So if you're interested in this kind of thing, do drop by my stream and say hi. Sometimes I also review game logs submitted by my subscribers. In fact, all of the logs shown in this video were taken from the game logs that you guys submitted. The link for game log submission is in the video description, so please feel free to submit them if you're interested, and I might review them in future videos or streams. As always, if you want to see more such videos, do leave a like and subscribe. It really helps a lot with the YouTube algorithm, and it helps this video get recommended to more people. Thanks for watching and have a good day.